Hello, everyone. A very good morning to all of you who have joined us for this session of the Pause for Perspective series. Nishat, over to you, please.
Great. Thank you, Chavi. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of Pause for Perspective series. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Pause for Perspective series is a speaker series where we invite speakers from the world outside of KPMG. Over the past 2 months, we've invited academicians, thinkers, and now practitioners to talk to us about various facets of leadership as we are actually going through the coronavirus crisis. We've heard speakers talk about the importance of communication, resilience, happiness, the importance of being focused, and the ability to come back stronger from a crisis. Our speakers have been from across the world, and today's session is no exception. Today's session, in fact, is special for more than one reason. One, we have two dynamic leaders, women leaders, who are going to be talking to us. And two, it is about something around technology, something that has surfaced and has become so important today. Besides, one of the most important things that the coronavirus crisis has thrown up is the role that women leaders have played. Countries where women have been at the forefront have been far better at looking at and handling the crisis. So with that, I'd like to call on our speakers for today. But before that, Arun, over to you to introduce the two speakers for today.
Well, thank you, Nishat. So good morning to everyone, and Anjali, good evening to you. I'm delighted to welcome and introduce my dear friend from Silicon Valley, Anjali Joshi. Anjali served as Vice President of Product Management at Google for many years. In Google, product management is the hottest area. So graduates from engineering schools and management schools, they all want to be in product management. Someday Anjali will explain to me what product management is. All I know is that it is the hottest area in the hottest company in Silicon Valley. So Anjali led product groups in the core areas of search, which we all know about, maps, global infrastructure, and other products. But whenever my wife Poonama and I could not get to a location anywhere in the world using Google Maps, she would say, let's call the big boss Google Maps. This happened even a year ago in Rishikesh when suddenly a diversion came up on a road that Google Maps didn't have, and Poonama said, we have to call the boss. Now we don't have the pleasure anymore since Anjali has retired from Google. She's gone on to a new phase. She has joined the boards of MobileIron, the McClatchy Company and Lattice Semiconductor, covering software, hardware, and media, a whole variety of quite separate but quite interconnected industries. And I'm sure many Silicon Valley ventures are actively seeking her mentorship. Prior to Google, Anjali was Executive Vice President of Engineering for Covad Communications, Inc. And before that, she was at the then legendary AT&T Bell Labs, working in the areas of voice and high-speed data from 1990 to 1998. Anjali earned her bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from IIT Kanpur, where she was one of the very few women engineering students. She then went on to receive a master's degree in computer engineering from the State University of New York and a master's degree in management science and engineering from Stanford University. In 2017, she was honored by her alma mater with the Distinguished Alumni Award of IIT Kanpur. So you can see there are many facets to Anjali: technologist, executive, board member, trailblazer, especially for women in engineering and in senior leadership. On a personal note, Anjali's home and mine in the Bay Area are walking distance from each other. She's a great friend and she's wonderful company, bright, well-read, interested in varied topics from art to history. She's thoughtful, she's full of energy. Today, Anjali will be in conversation with our very own Shalini Pillay, who really needs no introduction, as the indefatigable managing partner of our Bangalore office. Apart from leading our work in India's high-tech capital, which is Bangalore, Shalini also leads our Corridor Connect with Silicon Valley. So Shalini and Anjali will converse for about a half hour, and then it will be opened up for Q&A. So over to you, Shalini and Anjali. Shalini.
Thank you, Arun. And good evening again, Anjali, and a very warm welcome to all our folks who have dialed into hear Anjali and learn from her many vast experiences. Arun, thank you again for the opportunity. It is such a privilege to have this opportunity to chat with Anjali. Just knowing all of what she has done and reading about it as someone who is so accomplished in the technology and digital world, who's really always been at the forefront of new emerging technologies and how they're impacting our everyday lives. I cannot think of a better speaker for our session today, especially in the world we're living in, where technology is such a significant influencer. Just look at the session we're doing today, where we have so many people connecting so conveniently, and this has become the norm. Anjali and I had an opportunity to chat day before, which was a similar session, but felt like we were sitting in her living room having this discussion. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us, Anjali, and to have the opportunity to hear and listen to some of your experiences and learnings. Thank you again for joining us. If I may open this up, and I have a few questions that I'm going to put, and then we'll also open this up to the audience, but really a couple of areas that we'd love to hear from you as someone who's been a very dynamic leader, a technologist who is now on the boards of several companies and very emerging high-tech companies at that. We'd love to hear you talk and share with us a little about what that journey has been like for you as a good, strong leader. What has that meant? A little about what elements have constituted and driven you through that leadership journey. How do you look at other women leaders, who may be similar, who are different, when you compare and contrast yourself with other male counterparts on leadership teams that you've served? Maybe that could be a good opening to your leadership journey across so many different diverse roles.
Thank you, Shalini, and thanks to Arun for the really great introduction. Arun and I go a long ways back, and he's always been a great supporter and, of course, a great friend. And it is a pleasure to be sharing the stage, or should I say, the screen with him. We've interacted informally at many events, but this is the first time we've been sharing a stage. So really happy and really honored to speak to this group at KPMG. So, and Shalini, it was great to talk to you yesterday. So let me just get started on the question you asked, which is leadership and what's been my leadership style. So I've learned from many great leaders and by watching them, and these leaders have been peers, they've been colleagues, they've been teammates, they've been friends, and the one thing that sort of made the cut and floated right up to the top was when I went to a talk by Dr. Christine Darden, and she was one of the women who was one of the hidden figures at NASA. And on stage, people asked her, so how was it like to be a Black woman in engineering at that time? And she didn't bat an eye, and she said, you have to do your job and you have to do it well. And it struck me is that competence is the bedrock. I mean, if you're not competent, then nothing else really works. And so competence is absolutely table stakes. Leadership, work, anything, you just have to give it your all and be good at your job. And without that, you cannot have anything else. The second thing I've always felt is important is being there. And I've kept in mind the speech that Theodore Roosevelt gave in Paris. It's a very famous speech. It's called The Man in the Arena. And what the essence of it is that don't be a spectator or a critic, be in the arena. And to me, that means you have to be with your team. You have to join them in their ups and downs, through their difficulties and their challenges. And you have to they have to feel like they at all times that they have support from you, because if they know that they are supported, they're going to take many more risks and they are going to feel much more comfortable doing difficult things. So be there. The third thing I think about is, you have to be optimistic and resilient. And any big project that you do, you are going to have ups and downs. And your team is going to go up and down with you, but you have to be optimistic. And it's not that you're going to fail and because you are, or not every project is going to result in success. And so being optimistic and being resilient and telling people that, you are going to fail and that's par for the course is actually quite an important trait in a leader. And I always say, it's not how far you fall, it's how far you bounce back. That's much more important. And so as you take on challenges, don't be afraid of failure. Listening, and I think listening is a very, very important skill in a leader. You have to listen to your team, your colleagues, your peers in the organization, and as well as experts. And you have to take a lot of input before you make a decision. And the more informed you are and the more inclusive you are, the better your relationships will be with your peers, and the more and bigger projects that you'll be able to get done. So that's also been very important to me. Always giving credit and taking blame. All projects have many, many people in them. They all help you get your job done. And so when there is success, always be sure to share the credit with everybody who's been on your team, who's even just been on the sidelines and kept cheering you on. And just make sure that you include everyone and acknowledge them in any success. And take the blame. Don't be afraid to take responsibility for failure. And the best thing you can do is admit it and say it didn't work out and move on to the next thing. And less damage is done if you just admit failure and move on, rather than, trying to make excuses or hide behind anything or so on. I think that, being honest and transparent about failure is very, very key. And finally, leaders often feel, and a lot of young people come to me and say, I want to be a manager, and people don't realize that, managing is not bossing people around and telling them what to do. You really need to do the hard work for your team. You need to be there to resolve conflicts, to negotiate, to take out any obstacles and barriers that they have in terms of getting their job done. So those are kind of, I'd say some of my top things lessons that I've learned and things that I espouse while doing any job. And, lots of leaders have lots of different principles, but these things have been really important to me as I've grown in my leadership career. Now let's talk about the differences between men and women, right? So this gets like interesting, especially in a time right now where the women are about 7% of the world leadership, but the countries and states that have done really well during this crisis have all been led by women. And lots of articles on why is it that the women, why is it that the states or nations led by women are doing so well. So there have been a few differences that I've spotted over the years in terms of how men and women work. The first thing is that, women are very focused and they're very efficient. And that's mostly because they have to be, they have to finish their job at work and then they have to do another job when they get home. So they can't afford to kind of, dilly-dally. They really focus and they get their work done. And I've noticed that over and over again, you give a woman a job, she's going to focus and get it done. And they just don't have time to waste. The second thing is multitasking. I've seen women kind of switch context very effectively and do it very seamlessly. And it just comes from a habit of having to do it, switch between home and work, or switch between children and, family, or elders and so on. You're sort of doing so many things that your head just like, whatever context you're in, it switches to that and you focus on that and get that job done. So I see women really effective at doing I'd say, multiple projects at work, handling multiple commitments at home, and so on. And so essentially what I say is that these are not traits that are like just women and men, so borrowing from Tolstoy, say all good managers are more or less the same, and all bad managers, as he says about families, are different in their own way. So a lot of these principles that I say, apply to men as well. And there are some differences, and I think that and there are some complementarities. And one of the things that I do feel is that women have often got pigeonholed into, their soft skills are better and they are much better at getting things done and so on. I also see that women are as good and as decisive as men, but they do it in a slightly different way, in that they will get a lot more input from other people before they make their decisions, but they're quick to make decisions. And that's been one of the traits that has been noticed around women in this COVID crisis, because what happened was women thought of it as a health crisis first and foremost, and so they focused on that, and then they decided to solve the health problem versus conflating all the other issues that went with it. So those are some of the ways that I think that men and women have been a bit different in my experience.
In fact, I can't resist asking Anjali, in this current environment where men and women and all of us are locked at home, how have you seen some of those differences equalize, given that we're in a very different scenario today?
Yes. I mean, I think that it's been a little bit, let me say three things I've noticed.
Yeah.
The first was men who are at home are actually seeing how much work it takes to run a household. In India, there's a lot of help, but that help has also disappeared due to all these shelter-in-place requirements, and so there's a lot of work to be done. And so men are having to pitch in, and they're realizing that running a household is actually a full-time job, and so that's increased awareness quite a bit. The second thing I've noticed is women have actually, they're doing much more, because the men think that they're helping, but they're helping in sort of like, they're helping, I would say. They're not like taking on full responsibility, and the children are interrupting their mothers. The homeschooling is primarily supervised by the women, and so they're having to juggle much more work. And Sheryl Sandberg recently talked about it in one of her lean-in events, and she calls it women are doing like a double shift now. And so you're seeing much more work being done. In terms of work, I'm seeing also, the good thing that's happening is that since everybody is remote now, this has been a big equalizer. So everyone's remote, and the women can also participate from home. They don't have to necessarily travel and all that. So that has been helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that the hard part has been for women to define their own boundaries. I think that that's been hard because, with all their other obligations multiplying, they are often, tied down to either the homeschooling or the cooking or the whatever else that work has to be done. And at work, it's made it difficult to schedule meetings because women sort of haven't drawn their boundaries. So in some sense, I feel like, women have to step up and draw boundaries as well in terms of, this is my time now, and share it equally with their spouses who also are working.
So true, and so well said. Can relate to every bit of what you just said, Anjali, and more perhaps. And when I was chatting with you and learning about your career, it seems like such a perfect career. In fact, I was saying to Arun, if I picture myself in years to come, I would love to go the way you've gone in terms of post your Google long, super successful trajectory to be actually looking at being on the boards of companies. It is so perfect. But would love to hear from you on hindsight, when you look at that career, how much of it was stuff that you put out and charted a path for yourself versus how much of it took a certain path of its own? And when you reflect on that journey, Anjali, are there things you would do differently today? When you go back to the Anjali at 35, what would you think differently? What would you say to many of our young leaders on the call this morning? So I'm just curious, how do you look at that journey?
That's a great question, and it gave me a bit of a pause and some cause to reflect back as to what happened during my career. And first thing I actually want to tell all the young folk who are listening in is that you need to understand yourself and develop your work personality. In that, are you person who likes structured work? Are you a person who's organized? And are you an entrepreneur? Do you like to work with people? What is it that you know? What would you like to learn? So you've got to kind of first center yourself around who you are as a person. And so when I talk to young people, I always tell them, take the first 5 years of your career as just experimenting, as to learning who you are and what you would like to do at work. Because I firmly believe that, if work becomes enjoyable and you spend so much time at it, then it becomes like play. And then it's sort of you work in a zone of comfort, I would say, not so much comfort in terms of, your work, but a comfort in terms of yourself, that you feel at one with what you're doing. So for me, my journey began, as I graduated as an engineer. My first few jobs were like coding and essentially working on my own. And I quickly realized that that was not me. I liked to work with people. I didn't really enjoy sitting in front of a screen and coding, functions and so on. So that was just not me. So I decided to go back after having 2 children to school to say, okay, I need to open up my options, but as an engineer, it's going to be difficult for me to break into other areas. So why don't I go back to school? And I did that. But while doing that, I was quite intentional. I could have, I had admission into MBA programs, and I instead chose to stay in the engineering management, or management science as it's called now, program at Stanford, because it led to a career in engineering management. And I felt like I'd spent so much time learning, and I had such good intuition and instincts in engineering, that engineering management would be a good career for me. So I did that, and from there I went on to Bell Labs, where I worked as a systems engineer. And I realized that, working in this large company, which was so traditional, was also not a good fit for me. So after several years there, I decided to work at a startup, a small company, which was, breaking new ground in the communication space, and data communications and access in particular. So I was there as VP of engineering for several years, and really enjoyed that, enjoyed building a team, enjoyed doing really big, high-scaled new projects and driving innovation in the organization. And from then on, actually, I worked for Reliance, Jio, which is now called Jio, for a good year, and it's kind of hard to believe, but all the ideas that are coming to fruition now were in their minds back then. This was almost like 15 years ago. They've been thinking about this and so on, and so following that, I went to Google, and while I'd had a career in engineering all along, I decided to move to product management just as something new. So I made that transition there. And then, of course, I was there for over a dozen years, and then have moved to my next thing, which people call a portfolio approach rather than a single job. So a couple of things I'd say is, first, of course, understand your work personality, understand who you are and what you enjoy working on, and what kind of an environment and culture you thrive in. The second thing is, build your skills. So build your skills in whatever area that you want to work in longer term. And this doesn't have to be a narrow area. It can be a broad set of areas where you build your skills. And when you transition from one role to the next, half of that next job should be something you know how to do very well, because you can then make a contribution to the organization, and half of it should be new, where you are learning and you are growing your own skills. So and the reason I say that is, if you take on a job that's sort of like a back of the hand type of thing for you, you're going to get bored very easily. Yeah. And of course, the organization will benefit a lot from your experience, but you will not gain much. So you have to take on something that's new and that also keeps you engaged. So those are some of the pieces of advice I'd give to people who are starting. And I usually start my counseling sessions with I like to have people come prepared, and I say there are 4 questions. What do you like to do? What you don't like to do? What do you know? What do you want to learn? Just answer these 4 questions and come to me, and then we'll figure it out. And most of the time, people who come are quite confused. They don't quite know what they like to do and they don't like to do, and why that is important, because they look at externalities. This is hot, this area is great, my friend is doing this, or whatever else. But you really need to know yourself well if you want to grow in your career.
So beautifully said, Anjali. It took me back to some of the rules I have used for myself. I've made some switches in my career trajectory as well. And a lot of what you said is exactly what I went by in terms of the quest to learn while also enjoying what I would be taking on. So it's so relevant. In fact, a couple of years ago, the whole piece, and even today, KPMG lives by this piece on higher purpose, to say what is that purpose that's driving you, which applies so much to the wider organization, but as much, if not more, to an individual. It's really about what's your calling, what's driving you, what's your purpose, and where is that taking you on to. So well said. I'm going to go back to a couple of the leadership principles you spoke about, especially around competence being at the bedrock of it. And who can talk about that better than someone who's been at the heart of technology and new technology that's driving it, and yet being a good management leader where you've got to be there to the second principle you called out. So when you've got to be in the depths of that competent area of technology and yet be looking at managerial skills and management skills, how have you balanced some of that? And I'm just curious, in that journey, I'm sure there were some tough points, because it's about that horizontal vis-a-vis the vertical depth that you bring in, and it's an interesting balance. So just curious,
Yeah.
some of your thoughts there.
Right, and I'll give you the example of, when I went to Google, and Google was it was a very small company at that time, nothing like what it is now, and you knew most of the people, and the people there were, considerably younger than me. And one of the things I was like, what am I going to do over here? I'm either going to be obsolete and no one's going to listen to me, or these guys don't know anything, and I'm just going to be having to teach them everything. And it actually turned out to be an incredibly interesting experience, because some of the people I learned from were the youngest people. They were the new college grads who came in with a completely fresh perspective and new ideas and so on. And I was like, there's a lot of learning for me from this new set of people. So what I tend to do is actually I tend to keep a very open environment. So where people feel psychologically safe, they are open to sharing ideas and so on. Because, I could have been a top-down manager and said, here's something that you have to do and go do it. Or I could have just given instructions, or I could have just fully delegated and said, I don't really care what you do, and go do it. But what I felt worked really well was my experience, along with all of the new ideas that all the folks brought in. So my management of innovation was such that, okay, so soliciting opinions from people about whatever was the problem at hand and how we had to solve it. And it was quite amazing, because people with different experience and different perspectives brought a completely different outlook. And so what happened was we'd always end up with a solution that was much better and much more complete than if I had told them, what to do, or I had left them to their own devices. So I just feel like, diversity gets talked about mostly in the perspective of gender, but there's really diversity of thought and diversity of knowledge, diversity of experience that is really important. And so the young people have as much to contribute as mid-level career people, women, minorities, you name it. If you're going to build services for the world, you need representation from across the world. And so if your products are going to be used globally and by all ages and all demographics, then that's what should be represented when you're thinking of a solution to a problem. And that, I think, I think of myself less as a manager, more as sort of a consensus builder or a leader, or someone who elicits thinking and innovation from people and brings it together. And so that's kind
You could go on forever. I'm going to stop with one last one, because I'm very keen to hear your views as you've worked at some really large leading organizations. and yet be open with
do it that way, your numbers will go up. Then what happens is, once you've got a fairly good distribution and fairly good balance in the organization, then it becomes the secondary game, which is that give women opportunities that are bigger than them. Men confidence gap, and it's a well-known fact. Women will apply for the next job when they've already done it, and men will do it when they're sort of like 20 to 30% there, and they are much more aspirational and they're much more confident. And so I think it's important, numbers are larger, then all of those things go away and it becomes a much better, much more balanced, much more equitable workplace.
Thank you for that, Anjali. Pari, why don't you go ahead, and I will request Shavi to unmute you if you can go right ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks, Shalini. Good evening, Anjali. Wonderful insights listening to you. I was reading somewhere that generally women leaders face a likability penalty in everything that they do. At times, our desire to be well liked generally conflicts with our efforts to lead. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on the importance of these two contradictory conflicts of likability and authenticity.
For the question, and it's a really complex question that you ask. And
support from other women in your organization, they're kind of connected.
Yeah, they are. And, I'll answer the second one first. And I think that what happens is, because there are so few women in the organization, there is some needless competition between them, because they are the ones who are compared to each other. Just kind of another strange thing that happens is that if there are 3 women in a group of 20 women, you won't compare those 3 women to the 20 men, but you'll compare the 3 women to each other. Just in between the women, because there are so few of them. I think that things won't change. But as the numbers of women have grown, I've also noticed that women do support each other. And it's a little bit of a misguided notion that, this is like the old 70s where women were considered, they'd claw each other's eyes out. I haven't seen that. And I do think that women will support each other, and they will support the men, and the men should support the women. And I think that if that sort of culture is built within the organization, then these types of things will reduce by themselves.
Sure. Thanks, Anjali.
Who will sympathize with your positions, will empathize with you, but still push you, is someone who will help you grow through your career. And I mentor men as well as women, so I don't exclusively focus on women or men. I mean, everybody who needs support, I'm happy to help them. And my approach is structured. I don't want people to come in and complain about their situation. I need them to be thoughtful about it and come with problems that they need help with, and that they should have put in the work. Because if I am going to put in the work, then they need to have thought through, take on some risk on people who are not the easy choice. I think HP was a company who where when Meg Whitman was running it, when the headhunters came back with a slate of 6 candidates for a position, and they were all men, she'd say, this is unacceptable. Just go back, and I need to see more women. And you have to enforce something like that if you want to drive change. Otherwise, you want to get a job done, you want to get it in time. What are you going to do? Pick the person who's closest to you, who will be loyal to you, who will get the job done, and so on. But why not take a chance? Why not take a risk? Why not take a risk on a younger person, on a woman, on somebody else? And I think that needs to be set as a principle with the organization, and some metrics need to be put around it, so that managers are aware that if they're trying to fill a position, they have to look at a slate and not just go to the default option. Because most of the time I've actually worked with men, and I haven't seen women being difficult bosses. As such, I think there are equally bad men bosses, and I'm sure there's a handful of bad women bosses as well. But I think it's a bit of a stereotype that's gone on for years, that somehow women bosses are bad and they're mean or they are tough or whatever. I do think that women are tough. and that relates back to, them wanting to be efficient and get the job done. So they are less tolerant of, I guess, for lack of a better word, lackadaisical work. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, you need to keep the bar high, and you need to set high expectations if you're going to run a good organization. And if that makes you sound like a bad boss, then those are not the employees you want in your organization in the first place. Because you want people who are high achievers, who want to set the standard, who want to work to a very high bar, and build a really, really strong organization where people actually are ambitious. They set high goals and they meet them, and sometimes they fail, but not for lack of trying. So, if someone thinks you're a bad boss, then, maybe they should find themselves a boss that they think is good.
Anjali, before I invite another question for someone to speak up, there are a couple common themes emerging, Anjali, one of which, and I'm going to call it out from one of our senior male partners, who says, women quite often shy away from speaking about their accomplishments. And, they're not kind of very forthright in talking about it. Is in one form, people are asking about the confidence dimension to that. And then there are other views emerging on this Q&A, which say, doesn't that in some sense defeat the purpose of diversity? If you don't have women speaking up, the few women you have, you want them to be up there talking and not shying away from talking about their accomplishments. And I'm sure you've been through situations and observed that. What are your views on that, Anjali?
So let me talk about a little bit of framing that I've been able to do about the lessons I've learned. And I talk of them in terms of sort of like the 4 C's. And the first of them is competence, which we've already spoken about. And I think that's like table stakes. The second is I talk about, particularly for women, is courage. A courage of your convictions, courage to believe in some ideas, pursue them with passion, but be courageous and unafraid in face of opposition, which you will get a lot if you're trying to do something difficult. And the third is confidence. Not being afraid to be wrong, to have the confidence to say the things that you believe in, to promote your ideas, to promote your team, and be confident. Believe in yourself. That's something that actually women have a lack of. And the last is actually communication, and that is the point that you brought up. And I think that's really, really important, because women are very self-effacing and they don't talk about their accomplishments. They just hope that things will get noticed, and in that sense they do disservice to not just themselves but to their teams. Because if you don't talk about the accomplishments of your team is not viewed as successful. And you are only successful to the extent that your team is successful. So it's really important for women to step up, to find the right forums, to communicate the accomplishments of the team. And this one really is on women having to step up to do it and take the opportunities. And sometimes you're not given the opportunity. You kind of have to be proactive and say, hey, this is what happened in my team, and I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to introduce these speakers who have been like stars on my team, and promote them as well. So that's something that I think it's more on women to step up and do, and realize that it's important in an organization to really take the initiative and communicate successes for the sake of your team mostly.
And Anjali, on the technology side, today's these kind of virtual group formats also allow for a more equalized environment, don't they, at one level, allowing women and everyone to equally speak up.
Right. And this is a great thing that you brought up, Shalini. We talked about it yesterday as well. Earlier on, what used to happen is that if there were people in a room and people on VCs, things used to be, the people on VCs used to be second-class citizens. They used to have a hard time breaking into a conversation. And women, as it is, have a harder time breaking into conversations. They are not given to interrupting. They're not given to, talking over people and so on. So what this has done is it set up some new protocols. And one of the questions you asked is how has technology affected the workplace?
Yeah.
And some of these protocols are really healthy, raising your hand, writing a question, being able to participate in a discussion without really doing things that make you uncomfortable, which is like, being louder or interrupting or cutting off people and so on, which happens a lot. And so I think this is one good carryover that we should incorporate in our communications in all meetings.
Absolutely. And I'm going to quickly move to yet another theme, which I'm sure you would also expect to come up, which is a woman leader once said, our body clocks are in conflict with our growth cycles. How do we manage that work-life balance? As a mother of two lovely, very successful girls, how have you seen that? Because there are related questions around why do women have to work so much harder after coming back from maternity leave? How do we kind of balance that and do it well?
Yeah, a lot of women ask this question, and they always like plan a lot of women came to me and say, well, when do you think I should have a baby? They're all, when is a good time? And honestly, there is no bad time and there is no good time. Life has to happen while you're building your career. So a lot of women I know like to think about it and plan and say, for the first 10 years of my life, I'm going to work and build my career and then have children. And sometimes they never come back to work. And life can be unpredictable. So my thought on that is that you do in your life what is right. And your career will work itself out. So trying to manage all these things puts so much stress on women, and it's not a very healthy thing to do in my mind, is to postpone things, because you then end up with a life which is full of regrets. But how do companies make accommodation for that? And that's a question that actually organizations should think about. And one of the things I feel is that women on maternity leave used to get penalized. But one thing that happened in Google is that you carried their performance rating from before they went on maternity into their first quarter back or first half year back, so that they weren't penalized for it. So you didn't go from like an exceeds performance to a meets or below meets or whatever it is just because you were gone. And that helped a lot, because then the women's records didn't reflect that. And so other things like, making sure that, you can't hold a job for that long, but making sure that they get an equivalent position, paying attention to what they want to do, making some accommodations in terms of the times that they can work and so on, will go a long way towards resolving these types of issues. But, to your question is, when is the right time to have a family? When is, with your clock and all that, there never is a good time, and you can't time it. You just have to do what feels right and what is right for you, and then make sure that when you come back, you're comfortable and that you can start on your career again.
Thank you so much, Anjali. And I'm very conscious of time. I know we've reached the end of the hour. We could go on. There are a whole bunch of additional questions. Would love to figure if there's another way to do a part 2 to this chat. This has been absolutely wonderful and so exciting to be here with you, going through these, having this conversation, and given some of the very fantastic new stuff you're working on. Would love to continue to look at how, through technology, you're going to make some big impact through the companies that you're advising and working with. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again. I will thank Arun for allowing us this opportunity. It's been fantastic. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague Nishat to help us close this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalini, and thank you for thanks to my dear friend Arun for actually suggesting this. And it's the questions were really, really insightful, and many of them very, very difficult, of course, and with no easy solutions. But I think with a group of women like you, Shalini, and all the rest of the women in KPMG, and with a CEO like Arun, I think that you can really make big changes to how the next generation experiences the workplace.
Thank you, Anjali. Thanks again.
I've made copious notes. Once we learned a lot from all the points you made. So we'll take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun.